Hello and welcome to this important discussion. Today we want to discuss about land tenure systems with a clear focus on the following issues. Number one, characteristics of land. Number two, functions of land. Number three, meaning of land tenure. Number four, types of land tenure systems. Number five, land tenure interests. Number six, rural land rights. Number seven, access to land in rural areas. Number eight, tenure security. In addition, at the end of this discussion, I will provide you with questions that you can use to guide you in your revision. Let us begin with an understanding of the concept or the term land. Land can be broadly be understood to mean the surface of the earth, which includes everything that's available on it and which we can access without incurring any particular cost. Land can also be understood to mean everything that is naturally available on the surface of the earth, both living and non-living, and which we can use to produce things that help us, such as agriculture. Economists consider land as an important factor of production. Land has several characteristics. One of them is the fact that it is naturally available. Indeed, land is available free of costs from nature, and we pay no money or no price to acquire land. However, for us to increase the usefulness of land and to get maximum production from it, we may need to incur some expenditure. For instance, we may be required to use fertilizer to improve fertility of the land so as to increase the yield. Land is therefore the outcome of human labor, since its existence predates human evolution. It existed before the first human being touched the surface of the earth. Another important characteristic of land is that it is fixed in supply. That is, land is fixed in its quantity. The amount of land that we found when we were born is the same, and it is not likely to decrease or increase. Although an individual may increase the amount of land that he or she owns by buying another piece of land to join onto the one that already has, the overall amount of land that is on the surface of the earth remains unchanged, and it is fixed. However, only effective supply of land can be increased by making an extensive use of land. That is, appropriate investment in land can improve its production in terms of quantity and quality produce. The difference in fertility with regard to land is also another characteristic of land. It means that different patches of land have different degrees of fertility. Some locations are very fertile and are known for high agricultural yields, while others are totally barren and cannot support any form of agricultural production unless heavy investments is put in it in terms of water supply, as well as application of fertilizer and also other modern farming techniques. Moreover, the degree of richness of mineral wealth varies from place to place, so that in some places land has so much wealth in terms of minerals, while others it is completely lacking. Indestructibility is yet another important characteristic of land. It means that you cannot change or destroy the shape of the land in any given location. That is, land, whereas we can convert land from one use to another, such as from farming to housing settlements, or from a plain land to an artificial lake, these activities cannot in any way change the shape, destroy, or increase the amount of land. Therefore, land remains indestructible, and it is the way it was, it is the way it is today, and it will remain the way it is even in future. Therefore, we cannot in any way destroy land. It is basically indestructible. Immobility is yet another important characteristic of land. It simply means that land cannot be moved or cannot be shifted from one place to another. It simply lacks geographical mobility. Where it existed at the beginning is where it still exists today, and also the same place it will exist in future. Economists, however, describe land as mobile on the argument that it can be put to several uses. For instance, we can use the same piece of land at one time for agricultural production, at another time for livestock production, at another time for fish farming, yet another time we can establish settlements, and again another time it can be converted into another use. Such uses is what economists consider as immobility, but immobility in the sense of the various uses that the same piece of land can be converted into. Land is a primary factor of production, right? So that everything that industries need, such as raw materials, such as agricultural produce, such as minerals, are all found in land, or they are all produced in land. And therefore, we must at all times enhance productivity of land, because in doing so, we are making the raw materials and other things that we need for other productive purposes available. Otherwise, we cannot produce other things. Capital might not give us much. Human resources might not give us much unless we have land. And therefore, land is an important aspect that we need for purpose of production, and that is important in ensuring that other factors of production, such as capital and labor, yields or provide the desired results. Another characteristic of land is that it's a passive factor of production. Although we found land previously as an important factor of production, it is passive. It is passive in the sense that land cannot on its own motion produce anything unless human labor is put into it. Therefore, human element and capital input are necessary and must be combined appropriately in order to produce something on land. And therefore, the productivity of land depends on the availability of efficient labor and adequate capital. Therefore, proper use of land requires efficient labor, trained labor, and capable labor that is able to combine capital in appropriate manner with labor and also resources on land for us to have anything meaningful emanating from land. Another important characteristic of land is that land has alternative uses. For instance, we can use land for cultivation, for dairy farming, for poultry farming, generally for livestock production. We can also use land for building, not only houses, but it can also be used for building roads, building bridges, and as a source of building materials such as stone, sand, among others. Therefore, the use of land for any particular purpose depends on the kind of return that we expect to come from the land. Therefore, we tend to change the use of land based on our expected returns, so that we use land for what we think will yield the highest return. Otherwise, and that is why for a while we have seen land that was previously used for agricultural activities, like in places that are close to town, are now being converted into construction of houses. This is because housing is becoming more profitable, and the returns on housing is now becoming much higher than what was being found in terms of agricultural produce. Another important characteristic of land is the fact that land is heterogeneous. What it means is that land in one place differs from one another based on its location, fertility, nature, as well as productivity. Therefore, two separate pieces of land cannot exactly be the same because their fertility cannot be the same, the nature cannot be the same, and their level of productivity can also not be the same. And therefore, people prefer land in a place that they consider is appropriate, land that they consider is fertile and which allows them to get high yields, and also land that they consider to have appropriate technology. In that case, therefore, land differs in terms of where it is located, its level of fertility, its nature, as well as productivity. We now turn to functions of land. Land has several functions. One of them, it is the basis of power and industries. Most of the sources of power, such as hydroelectric, thermal, coal, oil, among others, are found on land. Industries are therefore situated in places that are thought to be close to power, as well as the raw materials needed by those industries. For instance, manufacturing industries obtain their raw materials, such as cotton, sugarcane, minerals, and other precious metals from land. Therefore, for industries to prosper, we need land that is either rich in terms of its fertility, or one that is rich in minerals and other precious materials. Land also offers important source of employment. Most of the employment opportunities, especially in developing countries, are derived from land and related activities. Activities such as agriculture, forests, mines, among others, provide a lot of employment opportunities to the people in the developing countries or in places where these resources are available. Although we noted earlier that land is a passive factor of production, we need substantial investment in land, and in doing so, we increase its productivity, and by increasing its productivity, it becomes a major source of employment to the young people, both directly and indirectly. And therefore, if we want land to provide us with more employment, we must invest in it, since such investments increase its potentiality and therefore job opportunities. Land also offers an important source of transport, trade, and economic development. All the major roads, railways, waterways, and even airways are mainly based on land. Important features such as rivers, oceans, and air, which offer important means of transport, are part of what constitutes the land. Products of land also constitute part of local and international trade in many parts of the world. For instance, minerals, agricultural produce are some of the leading products that are traded both locally and internationally. The presence of minerals, petroleums, waterfalls, and wildlife resources also makes a country develop and prosper much faster than those that may not have such types of resources. Let's now look at what is meant by land tenure and other aspects of land tenure that we consider important for this discussion. Land tenure can be understood as the rules invented by societies to help them regulate human behavior towards land. Ownership of land is based on land tenure, and therefore when we look at land tenure, we basically focus on the nature of legal structures or legal regime in which land is owned by either individual or group of people. We might also understand land tenure as the system in which land is held by an individual or the person that is using the land at any one time or the other. Land tenure, therefore, determines who can use the land, for how long he or she can use the land, as well as under what conditions that land can be used. Land tenure could be based on official laws, or it can be based on policies made by the state or formal organizations, but it can also be based on traditions or what we call informal customs. The way societies live, they also know how they regulate, how people own land, how people use land, and under what conditions land can be used. Therefore, the rules governing land are meant to ensure that land is allocated properly, it is accessed properly, it is transferred from one person to another properly, and sufficient restraints are placed on them so that we don't use land in a manner that disadvantages others. There are several types of land tenure systems, one of which is private tenure. Private tenure is one in which land is assigned to an individual. This individual can be a single person, it can be a couple, that is people who are married, it can be a group of people who have come together, or it can be a corporate body, such as an institution. For example, in a community, you may find that individuals have exclusive rights to residential, agricultural, or commercial buildings. This implies that they own these facilities, they own these properties. There are also cases in which, and therefore, in that case, therefore, it is not possible for people to access and use land that is under private tenure without the consent and permission of its owners. There must be permission for people to use their land. The other type of land tenure system is called communal tenure. Communal simply means the ownership of land by an extended family members, clan, or a community. And therefore, some of the lands that are owned by community permits members to collectively graze their cattle on such common land. They can also allow members to access resources such as forests, to fetch firewood in them, to use them for medicinal purposes, and also to obtain raw materials, as well as building materials from land that is communally owned. It is important to observe that under these circumstances, certain times individuals may be allowed to use lands under communal ownership independently, but such right should not in any way adversely affect the entire interest of the community in that particular land. Another aspect of type of land tenure system is the state. State land system, tenure system, is a situation in which land is allocated or assigned to a state authority. A state authority could be a school, could be a police station, could be a hospital, could be any facility that is owned by the state. Other than that, there are also other property on land that are owned by the state. They include forests, game reserves, water bodies, important features such as mountains, among others. These are important resources that are owned by the state. No individual can make claim to them, and therefore they fall under land tenure system that we call the state, or sometimes they are called public land. Yet another type of land tenure system is called open access. Open access implies that no single person has exclusive rights over such type of land. Anyone can access this land. Such land include land under marine resources, especially those in the high seas that normally belong to the international, that we call international waters. No single country can claim ownership to such type of land. Other lands that may also fall under this are those underwater water bodies, where every individual is allowed to take their livestock, to take water in these lands. Some are rangelands, others are forests. All these facilities, any individual that meets certain criteria is allowed to access them. Let's now turn our attention to what we call land interests. By land interest, we simply mean any ownership or possession right to land. Normally, there are three types of land interests. One is overriding, the second is overlapping, and the third one is complementary interests. Overriding interests means an interest in which a sovereign body, such as the state, has the overall right over the land. It can allocate the land, it can reallocate that land to any other person. Then we have overlapping interest. This is a situation in which several individuals or parties are allocated the same land, but for different purposes. For instance, some individual may have the lease rights, others may have the freehold rights over the same piece of land. Then we have what we call complementary interest. This is where different parties contest the same interest in the same parcel, such as when two parties independently complain rights to their land. Land rights also come in several types or forms, but first we need to understand land rights as to mean the various entitlements individuals may have over land. These rights, they are basically three. The various forms of rights are three. One, the right to use the land. Two, the right to control the land. And three, the right to transfer the land. The right to use the land simply means one's being able to use that land for self-advancements, such as for grazing, for growing crops, for forestry production, among others. Land control rights basically implies the ability of an individual to make certain decisions over a given piece of land that he or she owns. Then land transfer rights simply implies the ability of an individual to transfer land from one person to another, and also to transfer land from one use to another use. Let's now look at land administration. First, by understanding what land administration is. Land administration simply implies the rules of land tenure and the way they are applied and made operational. The administration of land can be formal or informal. It is formal when we are using the legal systems or laws that have been enacted by the states or its agencies. And it is informal when we are using the customs and traditions of the community in its management, and also the use of resources that are on that particular land. Therefore, we have two broad systems of land administration: formal and informal. One of the areas that land administration concerns itself with is administration of rights. Administration of rights over land include rights, the land rights, the land use regulations, and land valuation and taxation. Administration of rights basically entails the allocation of rights in land, as well as the delimitation of boundaries of land, parcels, the transfer of land from one party to another, the lease, the loan, and as well as inheritance. In other words, how can we administer land in terms of deciding who, what, and when a particular land can be used. Then we have what we call land use regulations. Land use regulation basically deals with the planning and enforcement as well as adjudication of disputes or conflicts over land. Then we have land valuation and taxation. This basically focuses on how we value land, on how land is taxed, as well as how disputes arising from the taxation of land can be resolved. The other issue that land administration concerns itself with is the management of information about land. There are two ways. In the formal system, that is, in the modern system, we have information on how we get, there are ways on how information about land is stored, is retrieved, and used. And this one normally is done by government agencies, like in Kenya, the Ministry of Land and other agencies. They are in charge of all records pertaining to land. However, in the customary system, land information is largely unwritten, and it is based on the collective memory of elders or of the people that are there. And therefore, in many communities, we provide formal proof about land through the elders, their memories, and as well as those who have used that particular land before. We can rely on what they tell us to reflect exactly the right information that we need about any particular piece of land. Land administration also is concerned with enforcement of the rules and regulations governing land. It is important to understand that several issues can come in the process of use, access, as well as management of land. And therefore, there are several laws that have been laid down by state agencies, and these laws, there must be a way on how they are used to ensure that order, law and order is maintained in the use of land. Otherwise, without these proper systems and structures, the management of land and the administration of land can be very chaotic, and in the process, people might get discouraged investing in land. Therefore, enforcement basically ensures that land is properly, the laws governing the use of land, acquisition of land, and other aspects of land are properly followed. There is then the issue of how do we access land? Because we need land, and land is important for a number of things. How then do we access land? When we talk about access, we simply mean the permission or freedom to use, enter, approach, or pass land from one person to another. Access might also imply the ability to use land and other natural resources, as well as to control resources, and to transfer the rights to the use of land from one person to another. There are several methods that are normally used to access land. One of them are what we call the customary rights. Customary rights are basically rights that are bequeathed or passed over to us through our traditions, through our cultural practices. And therefore, this is one area in which we can have the right to access land. People who occupy land might decide to give a portion of the land to those who want to use it. For instance, if you want to access land for grazing purposes, elders or traditions dictates on where we can graze, who can graze, in what area, including the rotational, which areas should be preserved for farming, which areas should be preserved for livestock production, which areas should be preserved to serve as forest, among others. These are basically based on traditions, or what we call the customary rights. Another method of accessing land is what we call adverse possession. Adverse possession simply means an owner of the land owning that land after living in that particular piece of land for a given period of time. Many times, if you live in a piece of land for between 10 to 12 years without the owner of the land coming out to identify him or herself as the owner of that land, and you go ahead to establish certain property to use that the land, and also prove that you have also been maintaining the land, you have been paying land rates and the taxes that government requires the owner to pay on that land, such an individual can be given entitlement to such piece of land. Otherwise, there are other criteria that are normally there that individuals are required to prove or to meet before they get custody of such particular access to land through adverse possession. We can also get access to land through leasing. Leasing is simply a process in which an individual access and utilize land for a given period of time. When land is leased to you, the person leasing the land, or whom we call the lessee, is not the legal owner of the land, and he has to use that land for the period that is allowed to use it. Leasing normally comes in many forms. There's what we call fixed term tenancy, periodic tenancy, tenancy at will, and tenancy at sufferance. Let's have a brief look at fixed term tenancy. Simply means that there is a definite beginning and ending date for the use of that particular land or access to that particular land. That tenancy agreement ends upon the expiry of that particular period. In this case, there is no room for renewing it. Then there's what we call a periodic tenancy. A periodic tenancy might mean that you agree with the owner of the land to use it for a given period of time. It could be 5 years, 10 years, or any other given of time. And in that case, therefore, the agreement is open. It can be renewed for a further 5 years or any other number of years that both the lessee and the lessee agree. Then there's what we call the tenancy at will. This one is a case in which you use the land for any duration of time, but it can be terminated any time as long as a reasonable notice is given. This is basically what applies in many cases for rental houses, where you go into the house and live and stay there, and you leave at any time that you think to leave. Then there is what we call the tenancy of sufferance. Sufferance simply means, in this case, the tenancy period upon which you are to vacate the land has expired, but the owner of the land has allowed you to remain on the land until he deems it necessary to eject you from that particular piece. Another way through which we can access land is what we call sharecropping. Sharecropping simply means an arrangement with regard to how the crops or the yields, the harvests that is obtained from that land is going to be shared between the owner of the land and the person using that particular land. There always has to be an arrangement, prior arrangement, that upon harvesting, I will share a given amount of crop to the owner of the land. And therefore, both of you work to ensure that the owner of the land must give the tenant sufficient peace and sufficient room to invest in land so that he gets appropriate yield. Once that is done, then a given portion or percentage of the harvest is passed over to the owner of the farm. Another aspect or another method of accessing land is what we call inheritance. Inheritance simply means passing on a private property, such as land, to another person upon the death of the person. A person who stands to inherit a given property, such as land, is called the heir. Now, a person does not become an heir until the death of the property owner. Otherwise, before the person dies, you can only be referred to as the heir apparent, but not the actual heir. Inheritance rules are normally, in many cases, developed. Many times, especially in the traditional sense, there are three forms of rules. We have what we call matrilineal inheritance. This is a case in which property is only inherited by the male children. Then we have what we call matrilineal inheritance. In this case, it is only the female children that inherit the property. However, in other instances, we have what we call egalitarian inheritance. This is where all the children, regardless of their gender, stand to inherit the property. Another method through which we can access land is through purchase, simply buying land from a willing seller. Indeed, in Kenya, the Constitution permits any citizen to buy land anywhere. However, it is important for us to ensure that anytime we are purchasing land, we follow and understand the legal procedures that are needed in accessing land or in purchasing land. The first one is land identification. You identify the land. The second one, you do the search of the land at the land registry to establish whether the person who wants to sell it to you is actually the real owner. You can also do the search at the county office. Once you have done that and you have found that the person that intends to buy the land is the real owner, you are given what we call a clearance certificate. After that, you obtain the maps. Then after that, you have a discussion on the price. You draw a sale agreement, which you take to the Land Control Board for clearance. Land Control Board is necessary because it is composed of elders, people who fully know that land and who the real owners are. Later on, you get the transfer documents. Valuation of the land is done, and then the land is officially registered and transferred to you. These procedures are important for all of us to understand. We can also access land through what we call land reforms. Land reform simply means coming up with measures or policies or interventions by national governments so as to improve access to land by groups that have been historically marginalized, those who have not been able to have land. And land reforms, in many cases, it targets large tracts of land that are owned by a few people and which, in the understanding of the government, are not put into full use. So that in such cases, the government might decide to come up with new policies that takes land away from those who have more than what they need because they are not utilizing them, then redistributing them to groups and individuals that they feel need it most and they feel that historically have been marginalized. While owning land is good, there is also the aspect of security. How secure is my land? Then what exactly is tenure security? Security of tenure simply means the certainty or the surety that your right to land will be recognized by others and protected in instances where there are certain challenges. And the right of an individual to secure land makes it easier for that person to put appropriate investments in land. Otherwise, individuals fear putting a lot of money on a piece of land that they consider is not properly secured. So, when you talk about tenure security, it's an important thing because you don't want to have land that you fear you can be evicted anytime. There are various sources of tenure security, one of which is community and groups. When it comes to community and groups, it is the fact that members of the community and groups are able to declare and say that this land belongs to so and so. They are able to identify that so and so is the rightful owner of the land. Many times, community know and they have traditional memory about who owned the land and whether the person that currently owns it belongs to the generation or to the lineage that owned it. So, one of the most important sources of social security is community. If community recognizes and agree that this land belongs to person A, then it is difficult for any person from that community to come forward and claim the same land. So one of the ways through which we secure we secure the security of our land is through tenure. Another way through which we can get the security of our land is through government. Government normally provides the recognition of land rights. And indeed, when you look at most of the legal documents in Kenya, including the Constitution, there is clear pronouncements on individual rights to land. And in doing so, government has the power and authority to ensure that people who own land, they are not disturbed in their land, their investments, those lands are protected, and they are issued with legal and proper documents that give them recognition of those lands, and those documents are valid and can be presented anywhere as proof of the land that is owned by those particular individuals. A formal legal system as a source of tenure security simply implies the administrative as well as states, the legal system that is used by governments to provide security and sanctity to certificates of land, or what in Kenya we call the title deeds. It is indeed the function of the state to come up with the laws that ensure that individuals' right to property are protected. People who might wish to trespass into other people's land, they are arrested and prosecuted, while others who want to forcefully acquire land from other people are stopped through the legal means. Where disputes arise regarding ownership of land by more than one person, it is also the responsibility of the government to utilize its laws to resolve those disputes. Although not approved generally in society and internationally, the other method that people use to secure their tenure is through coercion, the use of force. This is largely common in countries where we don't have stable governments. So warlords can dispossess people of their land and then ring-fence them to ensure that they're not evicted. And as long as they're active and state security is unable to overpower them, they will remain in those lands, cultivate those lands, and do everything that they want with those land. This method of tenure security is normally not approved in many countries because it stifles processes that have been designed to ensure that proper structures, proper laws, proper systems, proper institutions are put in place to help in governing the land. Otherwise, that is the end of this discussion. In the following slide, you will find questions that can guide you in your vision. Thank you so much for listening.